Okay, right. So we're here now with Barry Hilton of the Leeds Valsburg. We've just been playing a game of the latest edition of Beneath the Lily Banners, which is called, Barry?
The War of Three Kings.
War of the Three Kings. Why? What's that about?
Well, it's pretty much set in the period of King William of Orange, or William III as he became, and Louis XIV and James II. So it's Grand Alliance stroke 9 Years' War, whatever you want to call it. But we've centred it in Ireland where the three kings had armies.
Okay, going back to the beginning, for those fools who've never played Beneath the Lily Banners in the first place, what scale of game are we talking about?
Good question. We're talking about army level games, but in a period when armies were not always as massive as they were in later periods like Napoleonic or 7 Years' War. So you're talking several brigades of infantry and cavalry on the table, but you could play a game from something relatively small with representing an army of 4,000 or 5,000 up to something representing an army of 50 to 60,000.
And I was just counting up while we were playing. We had about 40 cavalry, 140 infantry on the table. Is that about the going rate on a 6x4 table?
Yeah, you're going to get a good game out of that. You're going to get, well, we played here with two players that hadn't played the game before, had read the rules briefly, one player having read them and one player having not read them. And we managed to get ourselves going, 15-minute briefing at the start, we got ourselves going and managed 8 to 10 turns. I wasn't counting, but it was about that. And that's a club night, I would think. That'll be, or a good game at home for 2-3 hours, something like that.
Okay, right. What do you consider to be some of the best bits of the rules? What do you like personally about Beneath the Lily Banners and indeed the new version thereof?
Well, I like the fact that the rules have had several iterations. So they started off as an attempt to try and recreate the tactics and the feel of the period in a kind of gentlemanly environment on the table rather than a hugely competitive one. And having sold the first iteration of the rules out, when a lot of people were playing it, interestingly it got quite a negative reaction when it was first released, which I thought was very interesting. But then as people actually played it and got to understand the rule mechanisms, it became much more popular. We went to a second edition where we refined some of the mechanisms and got an even better period feel into it, simplified it somewhat in some respects. But the third iteration of the rules now has aligned some of the combat and shooting mechanisms and morale mechanisms with Donnybrook, which is another one of our rule sets. So what we wanted to do was streamline and align so that people would get used to the feel of our rules, whether they were playing on a skirmish basis or whether they were playing a larger battle basis. So I like the simplicity of it. I like the fact that it is in a period which a lot of people consider to be a very kind of pedestrian wargaming period in terms of the troops move slow and it's linear and it's not very exciting. What you get is a dynamic game which is fun, and the mechanisms are pretty much, they're light on the brain, if I can put it that way, so people don't have a headache at the end of the night and they've had a bit of excitement on the table. That was really the idea of it.
Just talking briefly about some of the mechanics, it's quite heavy on different use of dice, so we're going everywhere from D6 to D10, aren't we, for representing different things on the battlefield. So is it that veterans are using D12s even, or D10s?
That's a very key change from the way that Lily Banners was played before. The reason why we shifted to using a different dice type to represent a different troop quality was, number one, to reduce the number of factors on modifiers effectively, shooting modifiers, combat modifiers, morale modifiers even, and also to align the rules with Donnybrook, because that use of a different dice type for a different troop type is already in Donnybrook. So basically you have 3 troop types in Donnybrook, which are raw troops, effectively recruit troops, drilled troops, trained troops, effectively veteran troops. And what we've done is we've transferred that mechanism using the terms raw, drilled and veteran, and we've also added a guard category for Beneath the Lily Banners, the War of Three Kings. What that effectively means is, if this was a unit here of raw troops, its signature die would be a D6, and you're looking for usually the magic numbers of 5 and 6, which are quite difficult to get on a D6. If this was a unit of drilled troops, you'd be using a D8, still looking for that magic 5 or 6. Commensurately easier to get that on a D8. If this was a unit of veteran troops, you'd be using a D10 to achieve the same thing. And in the rare occasions that you would use a guard unit, let's say here, that would be a D12. You can see how much easier it would be going through that sort of spectrum of D6, D8, D10, D12. Okay, so it means you have to have quite a few different dice types, but at the same time, what that does, once you get used to applying the dice types to the troop types, then it minimises the amount of times you're going to have to refer to the rule book, and pretty much you can then run the game knowing I use the right type of dice, I'm looking for a 5 or a 6, pretty much. That's a very top level summary of how it works, but basically that's what it does. So it actually takes, the different dice take a lot of the brain ache out of the rules.
Okay, and another thing that we saw on the table quite a bit was the use of tokens as well. That's an important part of the rule, isn't it? Putting the tokens down.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting topic. A lot of wargamers like their table to look like this with no markers. So they might like to record casualties on a piece of paper, and they might like to record a unit's status, whether it's disordered or shaken or whatever, using some manifestation of the troops doing this. We just produced a set of counters, which we've always done, which give morale status, and it also gives you a chance to use these counters to signify what orders the troops have got at a particular turn in the game. So you can use markers, but you could get by using these rules without the markers. They help though, it just makes the mechanics a bit easier. Okay,
right, thank you. Okay, what else is coming from you? What else can we expect from the League of Elspeth? What's in the pipeline?
Okay, that's a great question. My biggest problem is that my output in terms of creativity is not matched by my output in terms of getting things to market, simply because of the commitments. But we have, with this particular period in mind, we've got a Great Northern War supplement which will use the core rule system in War of the Three Kings, but it will give some modifications because the Great Northern War was quite unique in terms of its use of tactics and different troop types. So we've got that coming up. We've got scenario books for, particularly starting with Ireland, which have got scenarios for Donnybrook, so they're skirmish scenarios for smaller scale battles with perhaps 2,000 or 3,000 men aside, and many of those were fought in Ireland and quite a lot on the continent as well, and then some larger battles. So those scenario books are coming out. They'll be roughly in the same format as the rule book itself. And of course, with my responsibilities at Warfare Miniatures, we're continuing to expand that range, and the range is pretty much quadrupled in size over 5 years, and it will continue to grow because actually people like the figures and we're selling them, so that's great, and I'm very happy about that. So there's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, okay, great. Right, Barry, Hilton, thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
Cheers.